I'm now with head coach Brian Kelly. You got one more recruit today in Isaiah Foskey. What can you tell us about him?
Well, we were looking for a pass rusher. Certainly, any time that you finish up your recruiting, you want to finish with somebody that can make an impact. We think Isaiah comes from, obviously a great program, De La Salle. It's a great fit, a strong student. But more importantly, I think we needed that guy that can make a presence in our defense. And, if you're looking at it from an NFL perspective, those guys that get paid a lot of money are those cornerbacks and guys that can rush the quarterback, and he certainly can do that.
Now that the whole class is in, how do you assess this group as a whole? What stands out?
Well, I think you got to look at it in its totality, right? I mean, there's going to be some developmental guys that are going to take some time. I think there's going to be some guys that are going to push for some time. And then I think there's some guys that could start for us. And so I think every class has those guys in it. I think you recruit that way. Not all these guys are ready to play. I think there's balance. You're always looking to fill in the needs that you have in a class. This has a very strong presence as mid-years, and I think that's a trend that will continue. We like getting him in here in January. The transition academically here at Notre Dame, it helps them quite a bit. We get them in the weight room, we get them in the spring ball, and it really helps them in terms of maturing and being able to play. So there's a lot of things going on here. Early signing day, mid-year enrollment, player development, and I think it's really impacted the way we've been able to move forward in recruiting.
You mentioned the early enrollees, 10 already this year. What have you seen from them there in their first few weeks on campus?
Well, I think first and foremost, they're all able to handle the transition. And I don't think you graduate early from high school if you're not organized, detailed, have put in the time and effort. All of these guys had to do things that were more than the average student. They had to take an extra class. They had to do some summer work. So they're all highly motivated young men, and so that works well here, obviously. So they've got off to a good start. They've been indoctrinated to a way of life here at Notre Dame, which requires a great attention to detail, and they get an opportunity to be part of our weight training program, which I think that development is crucial as well.
You mentioned, or this is actually the second year of this recruiting period. What did you guys maybe take from year one that you had to learn on the fly and maybe implement it into the second year with the staggered process?
Well, I think first and foremost, is this really the signing date? I think the first year, you kind of said, are they going to sign on this early signing day, or are they going to default back to February, which was, quote unquote, the original signing date? But as you know, we signed all of them except for Isaiah. So I think what we found is that early signing date is de facto the signing date, and I think we learned that in year two. So all it means is that everything has kind of sped up by a few months. I think the month of December makes it a little bit interesting because you're balancing recruiting with preparing your team for the playoffs and players being evaluated for the NFL. There's a lot going on there. But it makes January and February, or January in particular, a great month to get ahead, to start looking at 20s and 21s. And I know we're so much further along in the recruiting process than we've ever been. But having said that, it makes for a pretty intense and crazy December.
Something I've heard you and Coach Polian talk about is when you're identifying recruits, figuring out if they're a good fit for Notre Dame. You mentioned some of the unique academic rigors, but when you are trying to identify whether or not a recruit is a good fit, what are you really focused on?
Well, I think any good operation, you have to have the skills. So certainly they've got to have the skills to play national championship quality football. They have to have the skill set to compete in one of the premier academic institutions. That's easier to define, right? But they also have to fit culturally here. So what does that mean? Well, they have to understand this is the preeminent Catholic institution in the world. And so you're coming into a holistic education where you're going to develop in all manners. You're going to develop spiritually. You're going to develop intellectually, socially. And so you're going to be part of this campus. You're not going to be isolated in a football dorm. You're going to be part of this community. So understanding what that means, being engaged, being part of what's going on, being in the dorms, being active, being other-centered, and being part of community service. So we have to find young men that understand what our community is about. And when you do that and couple it with the skills, you find the right fit.
Last question I have is about the new Redshirt Rules. This was the first year in which players could participate but not obviously forfeit a year of eligibility. You have 10 early enrollees. Just how has that affected the overall approach to recruiting and then maybe even emphasizing more early enrollees?
I don't know that it's affected the early enrollees. As I mentioned before, they have to have a unique skill set in the sense that they've got to be prepared and organized. And sometimes their school will not advocate leaving early. I think the new redshirt rule has helped in some instances where you can get some game day action for some guys. I don't think it's changed the landscape of college football. I think it's a good rule. I think it helps guys, stay engaged a little bit. But who can play and who can't play and who's going to get redshirted and who's not going to get redshirted. I just think it's a nice carrot for the guys that they know they can get a couple of games in, and then you can kind of figure out maybe there's one or two guys that can help you later in the season. But I think it's a good rule, but I don't think it's one of those headline grabbers from 2018.
Well, Coach, thanks for the time and congrats on another great class.
My pleasure. Thank you.